Journal Entry 60, Saving Saya. I am back in Divinity's Reach, and how I have missed it. I know I cannot stand it sometimes. The people, the noise, the smell in the commons. But sitting in the tranquil palace gardens with my loot takes away some of the dark clouds over my head. I made it back alive. I was able to take the Asura Gate to Lion's Arch, where I changed into my new leather armor. I threw away my old clothes behind a rock. Maybe someone will find them and put them to use. Then I headed south, out of the city and into the jungle. It gave me some strange feeling of pride, or almost pleasure, that my stay in Divinity's Reach had not made me lazy. I managed to keep up a good pace, sleeping high up in trees or on cliffs to prevent me from being attacked while sleeping. Sleeping might be to stretch the truth a bit too far. Resting is maybe a better word. I reached Fort Trinity, where I convinced them to let me stay for the night and resupply, before entering Ore the next day. The Pact had managed to establish a foothold on the other side of the iron bridges, so crossing them did not bring me any trouble. But on reaching the foothold on the other side, I found it to be under attack by the Risen. First, I thought to take advantage of the situation, to sneak past it unnoticed. But something made me turn around. Something drew me to raise my bow and to aid the defenders. The battle intensified, and wave after wave of risen abominations, thralls, brutes, maggots, and sorcerers assaulted the camp. Soon the abominations had broken the lines of defense, and a chaotic melee was all that remained. In the end we prevailed, and to thank me I got the camp commander to write me a letter asking every Pact camp commander to give me quarters and let me buy supplies without questions. The Straits of Devastation was a nightmare. The map I had bought previous to my departure from Divinity's Reach proved to be lacking a lot of detail, and many times I had to turn back to find another way through the maze of giant corals. The Risen was ever present, but seemed to be calmer now that their master had been slain. Most of them stood still or lay on the ground, only moving to attack if I got too close. Some were working the fields of their own imagination, and risen cattle grazed grass that had since long been rotting away into nothingness. I successfully and without any issues entered Malcolm's Leap, which proved to be much easier to cross than the Straits of Devastation. Its open plains made it easy to spot the Risen, and since they only attacked living things that came too close, it was easy to avoid getting attacked. At times, when they were too plentiful, I put an arrow to their knee, making any attempt to pursue me an instant failure. After crossing Malcolm's Leap, I found a small secluded beach where I made my camp. The following days I spent on reconnaissance, trying to find a way into the Inquest base. Finding the base itself was not that hard, but its defense system seemed impenetrable. Attack golems, defense golems, and Inquest Asura patrolled the inner perimeter, and automatic turrets made up the outer line of defense. It was late in the second day of my reconnaissance, when taking a break on shore, that I found a path behind some rocks leading to what looked like an old Asura-built gate. I watched it for a few eventless hours before approaching it. Upon inspection, it looked like it was a long time since it had been used. The gate did not seem to have any lock mechanism. Not that I would have been able to pick it anyway. And above it flashed some sort of electrical defense fence ominously. Getting caught by it would probably have killed me instantly, or at least alerted the Inquest. So I went back into the water and found myself a long piece of coral that I brought up to the gate. Then, climbing up on the coral, I waited just for the right moment and leapt over the gate. I landed safely in a small dark cave, mostly lit up by the electrical fence flashing irregularly. At the farthest side, away from the gate, there was a small pond, and the sound of water dripping into it echoed between the walls. Next to the pond lay a dark figure, and I approached it cautiously, trying to spot any trap or ambush. When I got close, I saw it was a woman, laying face down on the hard rocky ground. I seized her by the shoulder and carefully turned her around. And there she was. Saya. She was almost unrecognizable. Her her swollen, bruised up, usually pale face now exhibiting every possible nuance from red and yellow to green and blue and purple. Her arms were full of small scars and red marks left by injections, and she was almost unconscious. I had to sprinkle some fresh water in her face to wake her up. When she tried to speak, I noticed the next thing about her. She had almost no teeth left, and her tongue was so swollen it almost made her breathing difficult. At first, she did not recognize me, but after a while she came to her senses. After being given some fresh water to drink, she told me she had managed to escape on her own, but only gotten this far, and now she had been laying there for days, awaiting death as her liberator. She told me that the pond was actually a part of the inquest water system, but she was lacking the rebreather necessary to make it through. I let her rest a while longer, until she told me she was strong enough to make it out. Sharing my rebreather, we then swam through the pipe system and made it safely to my small camp, where we ate some damp, dried meat and spent the night. The following morning we started to cross Malcor's Leap, wanting to put as much distance between ourselves and the inquest as possible. Zaya could still hardly speak a word, but being true to herself she claimed she was fine and that nothing was wrong. I did not feel like it was the time to argue with her, nor the place for it, so I kept my mouth shut and pushed on. Crossing Malcor's Leap was slower than before, having to make sure Zaya got enough breaks, but eventually we made it through to Strait of Devastation. Having marked my way through the straits on my way to Malcor's Leap made it much easier to cross it this time. The commander of the packed camp at the oar side of the iron bridges nodded at me in recognition as we passed. When we came in sight of Fort Trinity, I thought Zaya would start to cry. I think she knows she tried to bite off too large a chunk for her to chew this time, and she seemed thankful in a way that I'd never seen her before. Her time in ore certainly changed her, at least to some degree. We avoided Fort Trinity and made our way into Lion's Arch. With ore behind us, I think both Zaya and I were relieved that the journey from Trinity to Lion's Arch was more or less eventless, except for some reason that we had to sneak past in Sparkfly Fen. Each day Zaya grew stronger and stronger, and the bruise on her face and body slowly began to change color and fade away. Her tongue shrunk, which made her able to speak more and more, but also to stubbornly oppose me whenever she did not agree with something I said or suggested. When it sometimes became too much for me, I reminded her who had gone through all of ore in a suicide mission to try and rescue her, and that effectively silenced her for quite some time. In Lion's Arch, we headed straight for the Azura gates, since I figured that Zaya wanted to get home as soon as she could. No one seemed to notice us as we hastily made our way through the ruined city. Everyone was occupied with either rebuilding their homes or re-establishing the commerce that was the lifeblood of the port city. At the Azura gates I made Zaya take a rest, while I went to make the proper arrangement with the gate chief. Having spent almost all the coin I brought along with me on supplies and bribes, it took every single coin I had left on me, as well as a bill of debt, just to pay for Zaya. We said our goodbyes, hugged, and then she walked to the portal to Holbrack. But before entering, she told me she would come see me after she had regained some strength. After she was gone, I made my way to the beach, where I found enough washed ashore wood to make myself a fire. The fire attracted some homeless people that shared some stale bread in exchange for being allowed to sit by my fire. We talked a bit, but all of us stayed away from the topic of sharing who we were. I did not ask them, and they did not ask me, by some kind of silent agreement. In the morning, I left before they woke up, and when the sun rose in the east, I had already left Lion's Arch behind me. I tried to keep up the pace on my way through Kryta, wanting to reach my home as soon as possible, although I spent a day and night at Fredrickson's burial mound. It looked like some animals had tried to dig into it, but given up, probably a fox. I found some wild berries that I picked and sprinkled over the mound, and then I sat down beside it, remembering all the things we used to do together. That night I dreamt of him, and in the dream I saw him look at me with his big sad eyes as his life slowly faded away through the gaping wound in his body. The next day I left the site before the sun rose, after having sent my prayers to Grenth to keep Fredrickson safe in the underworld. It was already midday when I entered Divinitys Reach. The marketplaces were buzzing with people and children were playing. It was almost as if the time had been standing still since I left, and it gave me a feeling of security. I was home again. It was not soon before I was stopped by a Seraph patrol, demanding to know who I was and why I was carrying weapons inside the walls. Making them believe me when I told them I was of Houseborg Gaze, it took quite some time, and convincing them to let me go home with my weapons took even longer, forcing me to use every bit of self-control I could muster. When I finally reached my home, I sent for the servants, and they prepared me a bath while I had dinner with wine. It tasted better than any feast I had in a long time, and after the bath I immediately fell asleep and did not wake up until the next morning after. The next day I went to the Temple of the Six to pay my tribute to the gods for watching over me and Zeya on our journey. The priests thanked me for my generous contributions and offered me their blessings, and for the first time in months I felt like things might go my way. Later that day I sat down in the palace gardens to play my lute when a familiar figure stood in front of me. Zeya had apparently traveled to Divinitys Reach to bring me her thanks, and had been wandering aimlessly around until she found me. I guess it would take a stubborn head like hers to go through and succeed with something like that. So we talked a while, and then she said the city was too noisy and crowded, and that made me want to share one of my secret spots with her. I brought her to the glass hawk dome that had been raised to cover part of the crown pavilion, and we climbed up on its head. I go there sometimes when I want to be alone, and the tranquility of the place usually calms me down. But Zeya did not calm down. Instead she almost shivered with fear, saying she did not enjoy the place. So filled with regret and shame for forcing her up there, I helped her down and then we parted ways. I went home and wrote a letter to Mixie. She, of all people, must know of someone that can give Zeya a checkup. I am worried about those injections she got, but I have not told Zeya yet. Yesterday I found her wandering the streets of Awesome. I invited her over to see my house and have some dinner. It took a little convincing to make her realize she was hungry. Somehow she had developed a sense of humbleness since our time in the Vigil, and she told me she did not feel comfortable getting any more help from me. While I prepared a plate of food for her, she had a look around my house. I do not know if she was impressed with it or not. I know it is not the largest home, but it is at least twice the size of a commoner's family house. Then we sat down so she could eat and talk. She asked about my home and my life as a nobleman, probably most out of being polite, unless she suddenly developed an interest for Divinitys Reach and Kryta, which I doubt. But I answered her questions and then asked her about her thoughts for the future. The poor girl does not know anything else than how to fight. She told me all that is left for her is mercenary jobs, or maybe to go back to the Vigil, but she fears getting shot on sight as a deserter after leaving the chapter without any resignation. I replied that I had been receiving some letters from Crusader Strongshield, and offered to send him a letter asking him to check on Zeya's status with the chapter. I think she missed them, even the tactician, although she tells me she does not. Under her tough appearance and attitude, I believe she is but a small lonely girl in a big world, trying to find a place where she belongs. I know that place is probably with the chapter. Now I just need to find a way to make her realize that, and get the chapter to take her back. It is rather comical when I think about my relationship with Zeya, how I tried to make her feel welcomed into the chapter as a recruit, and how she stubbornly refused to believe anything I said, or disregarding and ignoring many of my orders while I was assistant instructor. How she sided with anyone that I was having an argument with, and how she suddenly completely turned around on that Coden boat and apologized. Now I feel protective of her. Almost like she is my little sister, I do not want anything bad happening to her, although I know she is capable of taking care of herself. And like siblings we fight and argue, then we make up. And should she ever get into trouble again, be it in ore or in the Shiver Peaks, I will come to her aid again. My little sister.